person, which I'm about to introduce, that person, he were writing an article about what to expect about the 5G network. So with that said, I've got quite high expectations for our next keynote speaker, and that's no less than Ulf Seijmer, the Chief Innovation Officer who's here to speak about 5G and IoT. So welcome on stage, Ulf Seijmer.
Thank you. So the first time I ever heard about 5G was about 10 years ago. At that time, well, we were in the middle of the 4G era. I had a chance to write an article about 5G and share my thoughts on what the 5G networks would be in the future. And I concluded that the 5G networks would be intelligent networks that would be able to connect the world without boundaries. So the idea I had was that these would be networks not only based on the mobile networks, but also Wi-Fi and other standards. I had a vision that the 5G networks would be something that would connect devices and humans, a lot of things, using one umbrella technique called 5G. This may not be everything that 5G is today, but I think it's super cool that the 5G technology is evolving into something similar to the vision I had 10 years ago. And before we talk about the future of 5G and IoT, we're going to travel back in time a little bit. So I'm going to share 3 milestones from the beginning of the 90s. And the first milestone is the GSM networks. And now you're probably thinking, what is this guy doing on stage? He's talking about GSM, 30-year-old technology, in an event when we're talking about 5G and IoT. And that's a good question. But I think there are a lot of things we can learn from the GSM technology. First of all, we have been able to connect almost the whole world using one standard. We have been able to not only have a network for humans, but also for devices. And the operators, they have learned a lot for 30 years. And they have networks that are stable, that are scalable and available. And these are very, very important when you look at how to connect your IoT devices using 5G technology. And the other milestone from the 90s is, of course, the internet. Looking back at the internet today, 25 years later, it's something that is in everyone's life. And I think that 8 to 10 years from now, we will see that the Internet of Things has become the exact same thing. Something we really, really, really need. And then the last milestone from the 90s is actually the term, the Internet of Things. So Kevin Ashton said in 1999 that the Internet of Things has the potential to change the world, just as the Internet did, maybe even more so. And I think that one is super great. So if we fast forward a little bit to today, where we're in between the 4G and 5G standards. So looking at this from an IoT perspective, why do we need 5G? I think there are a couple of reasons, of course, and I'm not going to share every one of them. But one is that the power-hungry 4G networks, they suffer from something called latency. So this is a very technical term, but it basically means that if you send a data package through a network, it takes some time from A to B. Years ago, I met a super clever engineer face to face, but he had a super strange haircut. So I had to ask him what happened. And he explained that he had purchased a camera that he connected to his network at home. And he tried to shave his own hair using just the computer and the camera. And he realized that things weren't in sync. So that is latency at its worst. But this is just a haircut messed up, right? Imagine trying something like remote controlling a car with this kind of technology. Don't do it. The other thing where I think the 5G networks are really needed is something called massive IoT. So we have learned that the 4G networks, we can cope with IoT, we can deploy IoT, but if we really need to go big with IoT, we need the 5G networks. I've heard that 8 to 10 years from now, each and every one of us will meet up to 3,000 sensors per day in our everyday life. And for that kind of networks, we really need the 5G technology. I think that inventing the ordinary, we have to look at 3 IoT ingredients. It's like a good recipe made out of just some basic ingredients. The first one is a possibility to monitor things. You know, the sensors that I just spoke about. Sensors making it possible to gather data like humidity, air temperature, air quality, for example. But it's also, one of the ingredients is the possibility to connect with things, to do something remotely. And this could be something simple, you know, like turning on the coffee machine or turning on the heat in your summer cottage. But it could also be more complicated things. And this is where latency plays a huge role. I heard about a company just recently. They want to revolutionize the way we use cars. So when you need a car, they could use 5G technology, just sitting in front of their computers at the office, and they will drive a car and drop it off just outside your house. So when you're going to the IoT Talks event, you can just drop the car outside, and they will find a parking space for you. No parking tickets, no worries like that. I think it's a super cool approach, like a car on demand. And the last key IoT ingredient is the possibility to find things. You know, for years we've been able to track where our lawnmower is, or where our car is, or our boat is. But the future brings more technologies to the table. Today we're depending on the outside GPS signals and sometimes indoors Wi-Fi to be able to position things. And in the future, there are coming more technologies to the 5G standard, even non-cellular 5G technologies that makes it possible to track small things indoor, like tools and such things. So now you have the ingredients, and it's up to you to create your recipe, something out of the ordinary. And when you do that, I'd like to share 2 thoughts. I used to say it's good to approach IoT with an open-minded approach. One part of this is that when you gather data, don't be shy to share it with others. And also that when you embark on an IoT journey, you may have a vision what you want to accomplish and what kind of data you should collect. But typically, it's better to have a broad approach and think a little bit outside the box, an open-minded approach. I'll share another example from the real world. So at a trade show, you know, when trade shows were still allowed, they haven't been for some years, I met this very smart guy who had implemented a system to measure how much water was consumed at water taps at public restrooms. They had their first test installation, and they tried everything out, and it seemed just fine. So the water taps were reporting how much data was consumed at each water tap. And their idea was to share that data with the financial department so they could keep track of the water company, that they build the correct numbers of liters of water being consumed. So they had their first installation. Everything was running just fine. So they went home, and I bet they had a sleepless night because they were anxious to see if everything worked just fine. And the next morning, they logged into their system, and they realized that one of the sensors wasn't reporting any water consumption at all. And they got a bit worried, so they called someone local out of the maintenance staff and asked him to go out and have a look. He opened the door, and he understood that what had happened was that the lights were out in that restroom. So to me, this is what IoT is. You create a system to measure how much water is being consumed, but you end up with a system that can indicate other things too. In this case, you want to measure the water consumption, but you can understand other things too, like the lights are out or the door lock isn't working. So you design a system to measure how much water is being consumed and sharing it with your financial department. But you end up with a system that is useful also for the maintenance staff, for example. If you have an open-minded approach and share data with others, IoT will become even greater. There are a lot of trends coming, of course, when we talk about the Internet of Things. And time is limited, so I'm not going to share all the thoughts of the future. But I'm going to share three trends that are just around the corner. And one of them is something I call the me of things. So let's, for example, I have my AirPods. I use them to listen to Spotify. I put them in my ear. And today they just broadcast music into my ear whenever I need it. In the future, I think these will be equipped with more sensors. Sensors that can understand how I am feeling. Sensors that can say to Spotify what to play next. Not based on an algorithm, based on what I've listened to before, but rather based on how I'm feeling at the moment. And I also think that these will be equipped with temperature sensors, measuring the temperature around me to tell the heating at home if it's too hot or if it's too cold. That's the me of things. And it sort of bridges to the next one, the health and environment. So we are conscious about our health. And in the future, I'm quite sure that health will be super important, not only from a perspective how we're feeling, because I think the me of things will lead up to us sending data to our doctor so they can check in on us with algorithms, of course. But the health can also be the air quality around us, because that is a super important factor after COVID, that the air in our offices and homes are just the way it should be. And one last trend is the smart sensors. Smart sensors that can not just send anything to the cloud and let the cloud take care of it, but rather sensors that are smart, that will only send data to the cloud if it needs to. Sensors that can adjust to like the surroundings. If you want to measure a machine, for example, how much it vibrates, you can add a sensor to it, and AI will make sure that it only sends the alarms because it learns how the machine is working. 8 to 10 years from now are going to be something great happening, of course, when it comes to the Internet of Things. And I've been to seminars like this, and I've seen people on stage talking about how many devices there will be in the future deployed in the IoT networks. And this isn't that number. I just made this number up. And the reason I made that number up is because, to me, it really doesn't matter that much. I think it's more important that we try to do something extraordinary with the Internet of Things. So I challenge you all to help me to break the world record, not in terms of how many devices that will be deployed around the world, but rather the number of meaningful applications when it comes to the Internet of Things. So I think that you're working for a company, and your vision is most likely that long term you're going to save the environment, you want to improve health, or you want to save costs, or perhaps all of these three. And for you, I'm quite sure that if you embrace IoT and make the best out of it, IoT will make the world a better place. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Ulf Seijmer, for some really, really and very inspiring words. I would like to include also our digital audience in this.
Sure.
So, Johanna, Judy, what do we have?
We got a ton of questions as well for you, Ulf.
Good.
And we have a gentleman named Andre, and he is having a question about if there's any forecast on how fast LTE-M, 5G, and 6G would be available in the European countries. Maybe you can ask that or answer that, Ulf.
Well, that would be like a broad question to answer. I think 6G would be available around 2030, 2032. I mean, following the evolution before, it's a new G every 10 years, so by 2030. And Cat M1, which I think was part of the question, it's based, it's part of the 5G standard, so I mean, it will be available 2030 and beyond.
Perfect, thank you. There's more to come. Stay tuned.
Yeah, sure. I'm here.
We have another question, and I'm going to reword it a little bit. It's asking whether national laws need to be adjusted or considered with the coming technology, particularly things like massive IoT. Tough one.
Well, that was a tough one. Yeah, because if you just look at the mobile networks, even that is a global standard, it's different from country to country. So I think when it comes to GDPR and all these national different laws, it's a super hard question to answer. And perhaps we should call an expert at Tele2 to answer that one, I think. I'm not that guy.
We'll be asking Shell shortly.
Ulf Seijmer, truly, truly inspiring.
Thank
that
you,
was
Niklas.
a great, great keynote, so I'm thanking you a lot for that. And you made me really, really excited, so thanks a lot for that. So
Thank you very
big
much.
hand, everyone, to Ulf Seijmer.